The fundamental contribution of Carl Jung lies in his discovery that within the psyche exists something much larger than the conscious ego. Jung called this greater entity the self, the objective psyche, and the inner image of God, among other terms. It's a vast, autonomous presence within us, yearning to experience itself through the human form and engage with the human world. It seeks its expression, whether we are conscious of it or not, and whether we are willing or not. One religious metaphor that captures this phenomenon is the Christian theology of incarnation, the concept of God becoming human. This metaphor expresses a profound psychological truth. As Edward Edinger observed, Christ is the paradigm of the individuating human ego. In this video, I'll delve into how Robert Moore mapped the essential structure of the self in the human psyche. He identified 4 central archetypes through which the self strives to express itself in our lives: the king or queen, the warrior, the magician, and the lover. Jung used the term archetype to describe deep autonomous structures within the psyche. These patterns are not personal creations of the ego, the conscious I. They exist independently and exert immense influence on us, shaping our behavior, thoughts, and emotions, whether we are aware of them or not. Jung observed that when the ego fails to connect meaningfully with these archetypal forces, the result is often illness, symptoms, or crises. These disturbances are the psyche's way of forcing the ego to confront and integrate these hidden realities. This integration, however, is far from simple. Jung, along with Edinger and Moore, emphasized that archetypes are imperialistic by nature. Each one demands all of your attention, much like a child clamors for the undivided focus of their parents, growing jealous and enraged when attention shifts elsewhere. These archetypes act like gods, vying for total control of the personality. The ego's task is to act as a mediator, balancing these powerful forces and differentiating itself from them. It must find a way to honor and channel these energies without being consumed by any single archetype. This involves crafting a conscious way of life, a vision and a wise and effective path to manifest it, down to a schedule that ensures time, energy, and attention are distributed in a balanced and intentional manner. Identifying with an archetype can lead to a detachment from human reality and even psychosis. Conversely, alienation from the archetypal realm may result in chronic depression, profound existential loneliness, a lack of purpose, and a life stripped of meaning. This is the heart of the human journey, to integrate these archetypal energies without being overtaken by them, and to channel their immense power into the world in a balanced and life-affirming way. It's essential in the individuation process, reaching a point where no archetypal force can dominate you, and you can embody their qualities without losing yourself in them. Ultimately, this is the human mission in relation to the objective psyche, the self: to take a conscious stand, to hold a steady, balanced attitude in the face of life's vicissitudes and tragedies, and to channel these vast energies into a life of purpose and meaning. To contribute the gifts of your unique individual nature, which originates in the self and is always guided by it through the highs and the lows of life. To consciously contain the opposites within in a mature way that isn't acting out destructively upon ourselves, others, and the world. This is not just theory but a practical journey aimed at integrating these deep forces that live in the collective unconscious so we could fulfill the human potential that is present in each of us. At the heart of this exploration lies the archetypal self, the deep, organizing principle within each of us. Jung described the self as a wholeness that integrates all parts of the psyche, symbolized by the sacred union of opposites, what he called the conjunctio, or the marriage of king and queen. This union is not just mythic, it's a profound psychological process. It's about bringing balance to the chaos that surrounds and sometimes overwhelms us. Comparative mythology and anthropology have expanded our lens, showing us how archetypes like masculinity, femininity, and the self manifest in diverse ways across cultures. These archetypes are not static or confined to one interpretation. They are dynamic and complex, offering insights into the many facets of human experience. Let's dive into the 4 archetypes that Robert Moore points to as the central patterns the self manifests through us, human beings, in their light and shadow forms. The King and Queen archetypes represent the central pillars of stability and purpose within the psyche. When this energy is well developed, it creates a sense of calm, clarity, and confidence. The King or Queen provides a stable inner authority that helps us face life's challenges with grace and composure. This energy allows us to feel centered, like we are standing at the axis mundi, the center of our own psychological universe. From this position of balance, we can provide order, not only to our own lives, but also to the chaos that often surrounds us. However, when there is insufficient conscious connection to these energies, they manifest in their shadow form. This often appears as arrogance, narcissism, or a fragile need for validation. In this shadow state, individuals may project an image of confidence and authority, yet they are deeply vulnerable to criticism. Their sense of self becomes dependent on external applause, leaving them unstable and prone to anger when their image is challenged. The lesson here is that true strength and stability come from within, from a grounded connection to the King or Queen archetype, rather than seeking validation from others. To cultivate this inner authority, start by developing self-reflective practices, such as journaling or meditation. These practices help you identify areas where external approval may have undue influence on your sense of worth. Regularly ask yourself, what decisions or actions align with my values and inner truth, regardless of others' opinions? Another practical step is to build confidence through small, consistent actions that demonstrate reliability and leadership, both to yourself and others. Start by setting and achieving realistic personal goals. These can be as simple as committing to a daily routine, finishing a task you've been putting off, or improving a specific skill. Achieving these goals reinforces your sense of competence and fosters an internal sense of stability. Additionally, adopt a mindset of patience. Understand that meaningful growth happens through slow, incremental steps over time. Build a vision for your future self and life, and break it into manageable milestones. Notice every step forward you make. Bring to your consciousness the fact that what now is considered normal was once an aspiration. You can seek opportunities to step into leadership roles, even in small ways. Whether it's organizing a family activity, volunteering in your community, or mentoring someone, these experiences help you embody the King or Queen archetype in a practical and impactful way. Balancing this archetype also involves learning to accept constructive criticism without allowing it to destabilize you. This requires separating your identity from external feedback, appreciating input while remaining rooted in your core values. Remember, people often project aspects of themselves they have not consciously recognized or integrated. In many cases, you may find yourself serving as a mirror for these projections, reflecting their unmet needs or unresolved conflicts. This dynamic is not accidental. It is an opportunity for them to become aware of the inner work they need to undertake to grow and heal. So try and remain centered, and take criticism with a grain of salt. The Warrior Archetype embodies courage, focus, and determination. When positively developed, the warrior gives us the strength to pursue meaningful goals and stand firm in our values. This energy enables us to confront challenges head-on, to protect what matters, and to push through obstacles with resilience. The warrior's clarity of purpose helps us remain steadfast, ensuring that we do not waver in the face of adversity. It is the warrior's commitment to action that allows us to build, defend, and strive toward a greater vision for our lives. However, when disconnected from conscious awareness, the warrior's shadow emerges. This shadow manifests as compulsive overwork, an obsessive need to control outcomes, or a restless anxiety that drives us to constant action without reflection. The shadow warrior may believe that their worth is tied to their productivity, leading to burnout and an inability to rest. This compulsive drive can isolate the individual from loved ones as they are consumed by their mission. To harness the warrior's potential, we must learn to channel its fiery energy with purposeful action and deliberate moments of stillness. Start by cultivating a regular practice of reflection, such as setting aside time each day to evaluate your actions and intentions. Ask yourself, are my efforts aligned with my values and long-term goals? With my vision that I've built with the inner king or queen? This introspection helps temper impulsive decisions driven by unchecked warrior energy. Another practical approach is to develop discipline in managing your energy and resources. For example, create a structured routine that includes clear priorities and regular breaks to prevent burnout. Physical activities like martial arts, hiking, or strength training can be excellent outlets for the warrior's drive, fostering both physical and mental resilience while instilling a sense of focus and control. Learning to delegate and trust others is also essential in balancing this archetype. A balanced warrior knows that leadership is not about doing everything alone, but empowering others to contribute. Building strong relationships and collaborative networks helps ensure that your mission is supported without overextending yourself. Lastly, practice grounding techniques such as meditation, breathing exercises, or spending time in nature to cultivate inner peace. These practices create space for the warrior to step back, recharge, and gain perspective. By balancing action with introspection, the warrior can achieve sustainability and remain aligned with their higher purpose. The Magician Archetype is the seeker of wisdom and understanding. Its positive potential lies in its ability to uncover truths, provide insight, and guide others toward healing and growth. The magician is the thinker, the visionary, and the interpreter who helps us make sense of the world and our experiences. This archetype excels at seeing patterns and connections, turning complex ideas into clarity, and helping others navigate life's mysteries. In its most developed form, the magician uses knowledge not for personal gain, but to empower others, fostering a deeper understanding of life's complexities. Yet, without adequate conscious development, the magician's shadow emerges. This shadow appears as detachment, arrogance, or an overemphasis on intellect at the expense of emotion. An inflated magician may prioritize knowledge over connection, becoming cold and analytical, seeing people and relationships as puzzles to solve rather than connections to nurture. This shadow state can lead to isolation, as the pursuit of understanding eclipses the need for human connection. To balance the magician's energy, we must consciously align our pursuit of knowledge with empathy and a sense of service to others. Start by examining the purpose behind your intellectual efforts. Ask yourself, how can my knowledge benefit not just me, but the people around me? This intentional reflection redirects the magician's energy toward constructive goals. For example, if you are solving a problem or studying a new subject, consider how your insights can be shared to uplift others or solve broader challenges. Another key practice is to integrate emotional intelligence into your intellectual pursuits. When engaging with others, listen deeply and strive to understand their experiences and needs, rather than imposing solutions or theories. This builds trust and ensures that your wisdom resonates on a human level, fostering genuine connection. Balancing the magician also involves humility. Acknowledge the limitations of your knowledge and remain open to learning from others. Collaboration and dialogue allow the magician to expand its reach beyond isolated expertise, creating a dynamic flow of shared understanding. Journaling or participating in group discussions can help you reflect on how your intellectual efforts impact others and inspire new ways to apply your insights meaningfully. Finally, practice grounding the magician archetype in practical action. Turn your ideas into tangible contributions, whether through teaching, mentoring, or creating tools that others can use. This brings balance to the magician's energy by ensuring that it serves not just the mind, but the heart and the community as well. The Lover Archetype is the source of passion, beauty, and connection. In its positive form, the lover brings vibrancy to life, allowing us to appreciate beauty, foster intimacy, and connect deeply with others. This energy is what helps us savor the present moment, find joy in the world around us, and celebrate the uniqueness of each experience. The lover's sensitivity and appreciation for life's wonders can inspire creativity, compassion, and a profound sense of belonging. However, when the lover's energy is not adequately integrated, its shadow side emerges. The shadow lover is compulsive and excessive, manifesting as addiction, overindulgence, or an insatiable need for pleasure. This shadow state seeks fulfillment in fleeting experiences, often leading to imbalance and self-destruction. The shadow lover can become trapped in cycles of yearning and dissatisfaction, mistaking temporary pleasures for lasting connection. To integrate the lover's potential, we must actively practice presence and cultivate deep, meaningful connections in our lives. Begin by dedicating time, each day, to fully immerse yourself in a sensory experience. Whether it's savoring a meal, walking in nature, or listening to music, let these moments anchor you to the present, reminding you to appreciate beauty without the need to possess or control it. Developing the Lover Archetype also involves fostering authentic relationships. Take steps to nurture intimacy by being vulnerable and open in your connections with others. Share your feelings and truly listen to the experiences of those around you. This cultivates a mutual appreciation that reinforces trust and connection. Additionally, learning to set healthy boundaries is essential to balancing the lover's intensity. Recognize when the pursuit of pleasure or connection veers into overindulgence or dependence. Journaling or reflecting on your emotional responses can help you identify patterns of behavior that may stem from unmet needs or unresolved pain. Seek activities that align with your core values, ensuring that your expressions of the Lover Archetype contribute to a sense of fulfillment and balance. Finally, engage in creative pursuits that channel the lover's energy in constructive ways. Whether through art, music, or writing, these outlets allow you to explore and express the lover's appreciation for beauty and connection, helping to integrate this energy into your life in a sustainable, enriching manner. Jung illustrated the eightfold structure of the self in his later work, Aion, though he had put more weight on his typology, rather than fully developing the eightfold concept. Toni Wolff, Jung's collaborator and an insightful thinker, ventured further into the exploration of this structure. Her detailed work on archetypes deeply influenced Robert Moore, who regarded her as a guiding figure in his research. This broader framework invites us to explore how these archetypes interact within us. Each life experience activates specific patterns, shaping how we respond to challenges and opportunities. By mapping this inner geography, we can better understand ourselves and move toward greater integration and balance. The eightfold structure reminds us that our psyche is expansive and intricate, requiring conscious effort to align its many parts. Ultimately, the goal is to harmonize these archetypal energies through what Jung called the sacred marriage. This is the union of opposites: king and queen, warrior, lover, and magician. When these forces are in balance, we become whole. We can stand with grace in the face of life's chaos, rooted in a deeper sense of purpose. This sacred marriage is not about erasing differences, but about integrating them, allowing each archetype to contribute to our growth in its unique way. These archetypes are more than abstract ideas, they are living energies within us. They shape our behaviors, our struggles, and our growth. Understanding them is not just an intellectual exercise, but a path to self-discovery and transformation. As we walk this path, may we learn to honor all parts of ourselves, to temper the warrior with the wisdom of the magician, to balance the passion of the lover with the stability of the king or queen. Each of us should strive to examine ourselves as objectively as possible. we can begin by reflecting on our patterns and behaviors in order to identify which archetypes might be overly dominant in our lives and which are underrepresented. Balance requires consistent conscious effort, but is profoundly rewarding, leading to greater self-awareness and a more harmonious life. Ultimately, this journey is the fulfillment of the psychological and spiritual task entrusted to each of us. Let us embrace it with courage, curiosity, and compassion. Thank you for listening.
Let me just tell you a little bit about me, and then turn you to some of the archetypal images that we're going to meet in this story, and I hope in your reflections on yourself. So I'll try to be very brief about this. When I was a young pup, young Jungian psychologist and professor, I was, this was in the early 70s, I was doing research. I decided that what I wanted to do, young men don't really have any grandiose ambitions. What I wanted to do was to carry forward Jung's work and complete his mapping of the collective unconscious. That's all I wanted to do. So I've proceeded to get on with my research and to begin trying to work on different archetypes, to try to understand in a deeper way how these deep structures, what we call deep structures in the psyche, what they are and how they relate to each other. And so I did a lot of field research and research on people that I was working with clinically, and so along about in the mid to late 80s, I really stumbled on the discovery about these structures and how they are related to each other that really surprised me. And it was a discovery about the way in which the archetypal foundations in the female soul and in the male soul, how they're alike and how they are different in the way they're organized. And one of the most celebrated scientific discoveries that is accepted widely is that if you're going to be murdered in the world, it's likely to be by someone young and male. And when I discovered this particular way in which these archetypal structures are organized in the psyche, and realized the way in which the masculine psyche was organized, it became clear to me that I had made a discovery which made a lot of sense theoretically about what we have observed about the asymmetry, the difference between the challenges of being a young woman and being a young male, and the difference between the challenges of being a midlife man and a midlife woman. And so I was struck by this, and I had really never started out to be a psychologist of the masculine at all. And to this day, I'm trying to do a complete psychology of the human self. But when I saw what I had discovered, it became clear to me that I had to try to do some work presenting to men on the structure that I had discovered between these archetypes: King, Warrior, Magician, and Lover. And so I began to lecture and began to write about these archetypes that are the key building elements of the male psyche. And Robert Bly heard some of these lectures in the late 80s and invited me to come over and to teach with him. And he and I became fast friends, and that early work of mine became part of the materials he used to write the book Iron John, which you may have heard of. One other personal note about me, I was pretty self-satisfied at 45 years old as a fully tenured professor, and I had a good practice going. And one year, my wife and I, it was 1987, we took a trip around the world, and she and I turned down, we were in Bombay, and we turned down this one street, and the cab driver said to us, on this street, there are 10,000 women and children, and you can buy any of them that you want and do with them as you will. And I thought I had misheard him, so I asked him again, what did you say, sir? And then he repeated what he had said to me. And later on, and some years later, there was an article done about this particular street in Bombay, what is now known as Mumbai, about the most notorious center of prostitution in the world. Well, at that point, the size of the evil I was witnessing and the size of my complacency as a man, my self-satisfaction, complacency as a man, came into such stark contrast that I almost had a psychotic break. Because when I went back and I would be sitting in faculty meetings, and I was listening to the drivel that was being talked about, I was just in shock about the disconnect between what's actually going on in the world. And I might add, after what Micah said, a lot of this evil I was observing was imagined by, organized by, fueled by uninitiated men. So I had been looking for some way to have some influence on that. And so when Robert Bly's invitation to teach with him came, I had no idea that that would actually be an opening for me to help men through my work think about what it would mean. What would it actually mean if you might have never seen one, but what would it mean to be a mature man? And so since that time, many wonderful men like these that are here with me and you have been engaging that topic. Now, I never lost my interest in studying a map of the inner world, of the archetypes, and you'll notice that if you're unlucky enough to sit by me and ask me a question about them, because I will tell you more than you ever wanted to know about any of these archetypes. But I wanted to share with you in this story a wonderful thing. I didn't have any idea when Michael and Richard invited me to come think with you about this story. I had heard this story of Parsifal, but I had never really thought of it, using it in the way that their genius led them to be thinking about. And the human brain, the research has shown that the human brain is organized through narrative and story. And most recently, it has shown that it is through telling and retelling your story that the greatest integration of your personality comes. So, looking at this story, I just wanted to read you a list of these archetypes that are in this story and in you. And to give you a sense of just how rich this thicket is that we're entering. So here, let me just read these and then I'll shut up for now. The archetypal parents, the king and the queen. The lost paradise of our fantasies. The archetype of initiation, that is, death and rebirth. And also as a part of that, the archetype of the call. Then there's the vessel of transformation. The archetype, we might say, of the chalice or the grail. There's the archetype of the hero, the young man flush in his realization of his new powers. The warrior, archetype of the warrior, that which gives a man focus and the capacity for discipline and the capacity for authentic assertiveness or sadistic violence. The archetype of the magician, source of interpretation, insight, wisdom, making a sacred space. The archetype of the lover, which brings the wetness to life and the fertilizing waters of life. The archetype of the shadow, which we see in the archetype of the twins, or in the story of the dark brother. It also carries the archetypal understanding of the opposites in personality. There is the dark spirit woman, the archetype of the dark spirit woman. There's the archetype of the blessing, always after mother's blessing and father's blessing. Back behind, in the darkness of all these things, is the archetype of the great other with a capital O, the dragon, some might say the God archetype. There's the archetype of the transformative fire, the fires of God that you see. Every spiritual tradition has images of the fires of the divine. And issuing out of that sense of the relationship between the king, the authentic blessing, is also the archetype of sacrifice. That is the capacity to make an offering which is beyond your own narrow ego interest. Make an authentic offering beyond your own narcissistic ego interest. So all those archetypal parts of you find a place in this story and in these rituals that we're going to be involved in together. I feel honored to be here with you. I'll shut up for now. Thank you. Yeah, we need to get real clear that a soldier is not necessarily an initiated warrior. And someone who is heavily armed is not necessarily an initiated warrior, and often is not. The line that I think is important is this line, I have killed a man, now I am a man. And that goes by real fast in the story, you know. And I wonder if there's anyone here that believes that killing someone makes you a man. Obviously not. We have lots of monster boys who have killed a lot of people, and they are not men. They are not psychologically or spiritually men. So that's a critical line. And you know, it's interesting in the story. There's two places. He believes that killing has made him a man. That's part of his immature uninitiatedness. And the other one where he questions what his mother taught him when he says, she taught me to respect women, and I see that that's not true. If you read the lines, he wobbles on his commitment to his mother's truth. He wobbles. I'm not saying he gives it up, but he does. He comes back to challenge. He comes back to challenge Kai. But look at the exact quote. He's shaken by that, because here it's in the realm of what we call idealized self-objects. When your idealized representations question your values when you're young and immature, you wobble. You don't have the mature power of convictions that an older person does. So he wobbled there. He was confused by that. He wasn't clear. He was confused by that. Then he came back. He came back and righted himself and said he would engage him later. But the most important part is this bit about assuming that violence makes you a man. We're we're working today on, there are two, in my understanding of the code, the deep code of the self, the human self, there are two axes. There's a vertical axis between the royal and the magician. Here is the tension, the necessary tension between power and the capacity to have the wisdom to critique power. So that's really the axis of appropriate sovereignty, because if you're going to use your power with wisdom, you're going to have to develop the magician as well as your royal. Because the royal, without the insight of the prophet, the wise man or wise woman, will always abuse its power because it can't see through its grandiosity. So there's the vertices. Today we're actually working on the horizontal axis. And it was on this horizontal axis between the lover and the warrior that I discovered the fateful distinction, the difference between the genders. There is enormous interdisciplinary evidence that young males are flooded with their instinctual, I would say archetypal energies of aggression long before they have had the time to develop the wisdom and insight and understanding and empathy and compassion that they would need to be able to utilize their aggression in a responsible way. I say aggression because I can't stand it when people say, they are aggressive, I am assertive. That's all. People that have not dealt with their own shadow aggression think they're assertive. Every human is aggressive. Every female is aggressive. Every male is aggressive. The question is not whether you have the instinctual energy of aggression. The question is, have you developed the wisdom and the empathy and the compassion and the skill to utilize your aggression, turn it into appropriate, principled assertiveness and effectiveness? Without aggression, you will be sloppy. You will not have boundaries. Without aggression, you will not, without modulated, tuned, trained aggression, you will not be able to organize. You will not be able to be disciplined. You will not be able to plan. You will not be able to monitor and manage projects. You will not be able to linearize tasks so that you can actually monitor them carefully and see how well you're doing. There's a lot of these things. Certainly you will not have a clear sense of right and wrong, and certainly you will not have the actual capacity to protect the weak, and you may never develop a sense of mission for service if you've not initiated this warrior sector of your psyche. But what I was shocked about when I made that discovery, putting all this data together, was that, oh my God, the young female is flooded with lover energy, and that's why she tends to be such easy prey for the predators. The data around the world shows that young women do not have the equipment and energy they need to protect themselves from predators. Enormous data. By the time a woman gets to midlife, she has learned some warrior things. She's gotten insight, and she's got the capacity to stand up for herself, if there's any chance for it at all. Actually, women at midlife become much more effective warriors than men at midlife. In fact, the midlife turning is when the flooding of the warrior actually shifts from the masculine to the feminine. And the flooding of the lover that young women experience is experienced by midlife men. So there is the critical asymmetry that distinguishes fatefully, some might even say demonically, the difference between the genders. Just as a man is getting to the point where he can experience the delicacy and the need for gentleness in his relationships with the delicate, beautiful feminine, she has gotten her sword out. And look, I tried to get you to express your gentleness to me for 30 years. I'm no longer interested. If you want to know the cause, there's a lot of us now that put a lot of interdisciplinary data together. If you want to understand the cause of the enormity of divorce at midlife, it is based on this shift and the fact that neither men nor women maintain their consciousness of what has happened. And women do not do enough to maintain their connection with their gentle, loving receptivity at midlife. And men at midlife don't do enough to maintain connection with their capacity to act and be clear. So there's a lot I could talk about there, but today we want to focus on the enormity. Michael and I both are going to touch on it. The enormity of the challenge of helping young men with their aggression so that it is not demonized and they become castrated and unable to be assertive agents in their lives. I won't ask for a show of hands. Though I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, but to join me, say that those whose aggression was so shamed and by their mothers are humiliated by the slap of the fathers, that you have not been able to claim your aggression yet, even if you are in your second half of your life. I won't ask you to raise your hand, but think about that. There are men in this room who still have not been able to claim and learn to utilize effectively their own aggressive capacities. They're instinctually given birthright for aggression. See, my mother taught me, don't ever fight, son. No matter what, don't fight. And I remember one scene where my father was a principal of schools, and my father was a most honorable, incredible man of integrity, and my mother had told me never to fight. So there would be a lot of people that were ridiculing my father and saying horrific things about him, and I thought, I listened to my mother like a Parsifal, and I thought, well, I must not push back against this. That was a terrible wound. It took me till I was 60 years old to become. Finally, I've achieved it. Enough. I'm going to push back. But in any case, there are a lot of young men, and especially a lot of these highly moral ones, who wouldn't hurt a fly, who have simply have achieved becoming passive aggressive, weak in the face of things they should confront, and ineffective in utilizing their own gifts. So one choice, which I and many, many other people A lot of them in the academic world and in the world of therapists who never really had a warrior initiation and hate people who do. You know, they don't count their hate as aggression. I always listen. I listen to the hate. You know, I listen to all my pacifist leftist friends' hatred of George Bush. And it's not lost on me the incredible archetypal intensity of the hate. That is, my friends, aggression. So
you just find you.
Yeah, it's an instinctual energy grounded in your sociobiological makeup. There's a very clear biology of it, neural biophysiology of it, and it is that capacity to act in forceful, focused ways to impact your environment. And to this morning, I simply want to lift up. I've lifted up the passive side of a lack. If you lack a warrior initiation, you're going to be passive. You're going to be ineffectual. You're going to be masochistic. You're going to be in a dance with sadists. Because even though you lack a conscious connection to your own aggression, you will seek it out. And there are men all over the world who seek out ritual sadomasochistic activities in order to take the passive pole in being whipped in order to connect with their warrior. Let me just finish that. I have treated a number of men whose only connection to their aggression is arranging ritual humiliations by the aggression of other men. You follow me? When I help them to understand what it is that they are seeking in that ritual, in the activity, and I start helping them initiate their warrior and claim their own aggressive energies in a mature, responsible, related way, that ritual sadomasochism disappears. Do you follow me? Okay.
What do you mean by unless you've been initiated into a warrior initiation? Because
About what?
that you can't use your warrior energy, because I would say I'm no shortage of warrior energy.
Yeah.
But I certainly wasn't initiated into it by my father or my mother. Basically, I got beaten up at school, and so I thought, fuck this.
Right, it's in you. It's in you. It's in your DNA. There's not a man in this room that doesn't have a lot of aggression. It's in your DNA. The question is, what has culture and the vessel enabled you to do with it? Have you been able to bring it out in a mature, healthy way, turn it into creativity and a striving for justice? Or has it been sort of warped by your family, your playground? I was beaten up a lot, so I understand that. But in any case, you will be paranoid. When you see men who are paranoid, these are men who have not been able to learn to access this energy, this legitimate archetypal emotional energy, and to channel it effectively. So if you see somebody, and of course, persons like that are very, very sensitive to humiliation. That is, if you are very, very sensitive to being shamed and easily moved to rage, that's a sign of the lack of a warrior initiation, because that means that it's like that new movie's come out, the new remake of The Incredible Hulk. And, that Incredible Hulk is in there in all people. And the rage is a mark of immature warrior discharge. It's like Michael was saying earlier about Parsifal's response to that shaming was not a thoughtful, planned response. And we're going to talk in a little bit about young men.
And you say rage. Are you saying express rage is the sign of enjoy? Because
rage and anger. One of the things I want to get clear about this morning is that rage and anger are extremely different phenomena. There's a radical cleavage between the two. Rage seeks the right. Anger seeks the right. Rage wants to destroy everything. If your man is in a rage, he does not care about justice. He does not care about leaving anything standing. He wants to incinerate everybody, as we say in the United States, Bill Clinton country. And I say, not only am I going to kill you and your family and your kids, I'm going to kill your dog. And that's rage, And the rage is the Incredible Hulk that comes out and kills people and leaves the human holding the bag. Because that's an archetypal phenomenon. If somebody's rage, that is archetypal. That is unregulated warrior energy. Anger will seek the right. It will seek to correct things and not destroy everything. Yeah.
Which is why I think there was when I kind of started my work in the men's movement, there was a move that was called, I think, like New Men or Reconstituted Men and stuff. And there was a piece of it that was kind of feminizing men. And there was a piece of it that was denying any place for righteous anger and aggression and anything that was more than mildly assertive. And I got kind of caught in it for a while, and it felt, at the time it felt good. It felt like I was kind of, being peaceful. And then I realized that there were places in my life where I was raging out sideways. I would have to give myself kind of conscious permission to go from a 1 to a 10 somewhere, because I wasn't giving myself permission to go from a 1 to a 5 anywhere. And so it would, by kind of bottling it up, it would then come out. So there is, I think that one of the real positive roles for a men's movement is not to simply respond to the women's movement in terms of taking on the shame of 2,000 years of demonic patriarchy, but actually figuring out, what bits we have to bring to the table, and acknowledging, as Robert does so well, that they are different, and at different times in life we may be seeking other things, and that young men need a kind of initiation that young women perhaps don't need around this stuff. And if we don't get it as a young man, which I certainly didn't, then how do we deal with it later on?
They don't need it they need the initiation of their warrior, the young females do. But the young females are not going to go around marauding if they don't get it. They will be victims if they don't get it. But young...
Sorry to say that, but in society, I don't know what it's like in the States, my guess is it's the same. You're getting the rise of the women out in the streets, young girls drinking, fighting.
Yeah, but you need to do some statistics. Statistically, that's absolutely correct. And the wasteland destroys all boundaries. It contaminates everyone, and everybody starts to go into the shadow side of all of their potentials. And so, yes, that's true. But if you look at the statistics, it's insignificant. It's statistically insignificant. So if we're talking about where we're going to focus our energies, if you're going to be a man, you need to help young men connect with this instinctual given and regulate it and begin to bring it into their lives in creative ways so it can serve civilization, so it can serve justice, so it can serve. It takes warrior energy to organize any kind of effective service. Let me just go through the psychoanalytic reading of these warrior virtues. The concepts, the psychoanalytic concepts that correlate with warrior virtues. We want to talk about the tempering of the young warrior. There are 3 self-functions that psychoanalysis has delineated. The first is here's the $300 word. The aversive self-function. The aversive, A-V-E-R-S-I-V-E. That is the capacity of a person, any mature person, to recognize when something is toxic for them and begin to form a secure boundary against that. And if you look around you in your world, you'll find many people who are in the presence of toxicity who do not have an aversive function. So that exists at the level of cellular organisms. So it's a biological capacity to create a boundary against toxins. The second is a wider ranging thing, and that is the adversarial self-function. Adversarial. That is the capacity to actually act in a confrontive way when the thing that you are facing is something that should be confronted. To be able to be an adversary. Because there are many times in life when if you're not willing to be an adversary, I didn't say an unprincipled adversary. That's not what the psychoanalysts are suggesting. But they're suggesting that you have to be able to say no. And you have to be able to advocate for a vision that you feel is more just. And that's going to be an occasion of conflict. So you need to realize that persons who are conflict averse are immature on this sector of their personality. And the third is more general even than that. It is called efficacy. The E-F-F-I-C-A-C-Y, the efficacy self-function. And each of these functions you have to learn from other people. Each one you learn first from your relationship, the self-object, and as you develop it becomes a self-function. It becomes a part of your functioning. So efficacy, self-esteem, legitimate self-esteem is heavily grounded in the efficacy self-function. Some people have called it competence, motivation. But Ernest Wolfe, great analyst in Chicago, wrote about it as efficacy. And this is what happens when you employ your gifts in an effective way. And even if nobody else notices it, nobody's looking, but you get a rush of a sense of satisfaction and vitality because you know you can do it well. And it's very interesting. A lot of people have a lot of self-esteem, grandiose self-esteem, coming from a flooding of their royal sectors. Because the royal sector doesn't need to be, when it's operating by itself, I don't need to be able to do anything to be wonderful. I just am wonderful. And even if I'm a complete up at everything I do, my mother thought I was wonderful, and I'm wonderful. So I don't really need to try. I don't need to learn. I don't need to discipline. I don't need to study. And in the United States, we've turned that into our educational system, Self-esteem-based promotion, having nothing to do with whether or not you can work, whether you can actually do the math. So efficacy is if you're going to have a healthy sense of self-esteem, not one simply based on your narcissism and your grandiosity, a good bit of it is going to have a foundation in your actual trained capacity, your capacity to deploy your potentials in such a way that you look at it and you say, that's a pretty good painting, or that's a pretty good poem I just wrote, or that's a pretty good marathon I just ran. You can fill in the blank with the particular actual achievement. One of the things we've noticed is that a person that has that experience, their vitality of a sense of their personal self is really enriched. It shouldn't be the only source of a sense of self. But a man that doesn't have that, who has not been encouraged by a mentor to really develop his skills, is missing out on a lot of strength. So those three things are in the warrior sector psychologically. Capacity for averse, response, protection, adversarial, the ability to struggle for that which is worth struggling for, and efficacy, the ability to be effective. You see somebody that's ineffective, they haven't had a warrior initiation. Okay. So,
Robert,
yeah.
I think maybe it's also point out, because I heard the question earlier about like the bullying and stuff, is that, presumably that there are ineffective initiations that also serve as what makes up for initiation in the modern world. So,
oh yeah,
your story of the tree cutting and all that stuff.
Yeah. There are a lot, just because you haven't been initiated in the warrior doesn't mean you're not a bully or that you're not aggressive. Because they're the passive guys on the one hand, and for every passive guy, there's somebody that is a bully and a monster boy in the active mode. And the world is being run by them now. And the world, in 1990, I was writing about this stuff, and I was looking at a very dark future. And I said, if men don't start helping boys with this, with learning to regulate these instinctual energies, things are going to get worse. And I've started predicting an increase in terrorism around the world because of the way in which young men are being abandoned around the world. I wish I would have been wrong. Turns out I was horribly right about my predictions about that, and it's only going to get worse now. But anyway, just a few things about training the warrior. Assertiveness training. Probably everybody in this room ought to really look hard at the assertiveness training. To the extent that you're not creatively assertive in the various settings of your life, you're wasting this archetypal energy. And it's going into destructive, trickster, unproductive, uncreative expressions in your life. So one of the things, if I get a guy coming into me who's really weak on this, I'll just give him the book by Bach, Creative Aggression. If you're a nice guy, that book's really going to offend you. And if you're offended by it, that means you really need it. Bach, George Bach. He's really but he has got a wonderful section in there. It's worth the price of the book. And it's called The Price of Nice. The Price of Nice. And it's all the things that you create in your world and in your family and in your society by worshiping at the shrine of niceness. Nice is not a term we apply to men. That is a term we apply to boys. And when it's applied to men, it's not a compliment. Remember that when somebody tells you you're such a nice man.
How do you spell his second name?
B-A-C-H. All right. And I just want to throw out a few things that can help. I send a lot of people to martial arts training. If they're really nice guys, I send them to Aikido. So they can engage.
Nice guys, they go to Aikido.
Yes, because that's universal love. You know, they can kick your ass, but they do it with universal love. And so if you're a pacifist guy, you can go do Aikido. You don't have any excuse. And another thing, learn to pilot a plane. Because if you try to pilot a plane before you get serious about your warrior virtues, you will be dead. Because guys that fly planes and think they can bypass the warrior virtues, they die. Because a warrior checks details. They don't cut corners. They make sure the chute is packed right. They go through the checklist. They operate in a linear, tracked, monitored world where not anything is left to chance. Because when in the warrior's world, when you leave something to chance, people die unnecessarily. Do you follow that? Okay. And get this, project management. If you're a lousy warrior, go take some seminars in project management. Because if you show me a guy who's really a fabulous project manager, I'll show you a guy who's got some high-level warrior skills. He doesn't have to bully anybody. He knows how to ask the right questions to find out where the sloppiness is, and he will create a means to get it done and get it done effectively, utilizing the right amount of resources. So you might know a lot of guys who you can't stand that are project managers. And that's right. You know, just because you got a lot of warrior stuff doesn't mean you're likable, right? But don't forget that. If you can't manage a project, don't attribute it to your typology. Oh, I'm just an intuitive type. And, I'm just I'm an intuitive feeler. Well, that's not an excuse. Sorry. Okay. Two other things. Study ethics. Because the warrior's realm is the realm of the discernment of right and wrong and good and evil. And people who have an insufficient warrior initiation have insufficient outrage at the real evil in the world. So, I'm not impressed with people who try to tell me that the warrior's a bad thing. Because if you don't have any warrior, you can meditate in white light meditation while children are being eaten all around the world and not feel a thing except bliss. Do you read me? And there are a lot of people who are blissed out through meditation and other spiritual techniques, who managed to make themselves completely incapable of discerning evil, real radical evil, wherein it exists. And that capacity comes from no other sector of the psyche. It doesn't come from the royal. The royal by itself will do anything. It does not limit its own aggression. The lover by itself will just stick its tongue in anything. But it's not preoccupied with whether my sensual gratification is evil. The guys that traffic in prostitution, child and otherwise, they're into their lover, but they have no idea what they are colluding with, or they don't care. The magician is going to study. It's going to have a study commission. The magician guy will study evil. And another bunch of people go over the falls, or they go into the quicksand, and there's a lovely commercial about that. This guy, he's got these colleagues going into the quicksand, and he's studying it so he can bring it up at the next meeting. So the only thing in the psyche that has a sense of right and wrong and of good and evil is this system. And when you hear some spiritual type tell you they're beyond good and evil, I hope your bullshit indicator is working. Because nobody is beyond good and evil. And it doesn't matter how liberal you are or how conservative you are. You're not beyond good and evil, and you participate in it, and you collude in it. And the only thing where you have a healthy sense of honor and shame about your collusion with evil is in this sector. And so those are a few things about this sector of the psyche. In this next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to just talk about the king archetype, some bits about its positive virtues and capacities, some about the shadow. But by now you figured out that we're in the middle of a mystery, a kingship mystery, having to do with your own kingship. And I want to ask your permission. I seldom do this, but I want to ask your permission to read you a bit, just a page or so, from the preface to the first edition of this King Within book. This is the new 2007 edition that's got a lot elaboration of what we're dealing with this week. And the title of this, which I just want to begin with, is a frame. So I would ask you to do this for me, to try to listen for the frame or the context of why we're talking about this kingship business. The return of the king and the blessing way, a human longing. Of all of humankind's primordial longings, probably the most widespread within all times and cultures is for the return of the true king. Many people think that messianic expectations are limited to fundamentalist Jews and Christians. But there is a hope common among many people for a ruler who will come to liberate us from oppression. Few of us are aware how prevalent the theme of a liberating king's return is in world mythology. J.R.R. Tolkien's The Return of the King and Frank Herbert's Dune are two popular contemporary works built around this theme. Niels Forsyth's book, The Old Enemy, demonstrates the theme's worldwide historical ubiquity. Striking parallels can be noted in accounts of the story from widely divergent cultures. Many stories begin by telling of monsters who reign over a chaotic world in the absence of the king, the wasteland. When the king arrives, he first defeats the monsters and then establishes a cosmos wherein justice and peace can flourish. This motif has the same mythic structure that we find underlying the messianic traditions of Judaism, Christianity, and other religions. Many adherents of Islam look forward to the return of the Mahdi. Zoroastrians await for the return of Sayoshant. Buddhists expect the arrival of Maitreya. What are we to make of this persistent fantasy of our species? Do these fantasies simply reflect vestiges of the dependency needs we associate with regressive, even primitive, pre-modern religions? Many contemporary interpreters of psychology and myth would answer yes. But we have a different view. We believe these recurrent fantasies reflect a human intuition that our species is capable of far more caring and generativity than the Holocaust of recorded history would indicate. Encoded within our genetic inheritance, we believe, are what we call king and queen programs. If we can learn to access them adequately, they will enable men and women to cooperate in building a viable postmodern planetary civilization, a historical realization of mythic images of cosmos. The king we await is within, a psychological potential every man carries within him. In order to free us from the monsters of chaos, this liberator king will have to be embodied not by one individual, but by millions of men who have learned to access their inner sources of compassion and generativity. Is there any hope that men might learn to use their power for liberation and blessing rather than oppression and injustice? Could contemporary men find within themselves the vision and power necessary to confront the reign of monster boys on earth? Many agree with the late, great Reinhold Niebuhr that power and goodness cannot reside together in our species. Many believe men to be inherently abusive of power. We disagree. We believe that both men and women have encoded deep inside them an understanding of how to use their power for blessing and liberation. With the Navajo, we have faith that human beings can once again find the blessing way. It is much too early to say where this contemporary ferment among men will take us. Perhaps one day it will seem as silly, reactive, and shallow as its eager detractors represent it to be. We continue, however, to indulge our hopes that this will not be the case. Cynicism will never bring us the power we need to face our planetary challenges. Our hope is that more and more men will respond to the inner urge to maturity, and in so doing make themselves available to serve the world. We offer this book as an aid to those men who think with Blake that earth might be fair, that we can realize a universal brotherhood of Eden. Many of us remember the Kennedy years and our fantasies that we had of Camelot. We thrilled to JFK's admonition that we can do better. Certainly, we know that politicians deceive us when they try to present themselves as the expected one. But we believe the voice these men are echoing is a real voice, resonating within each of us, and one which, if properly heeded, will begin to lead us along the blessing way. That voice, I have felt a long time, is that voice of the King Archetype. when I first was studying all this stuff and trying to understand about these archetypal structures, I had no interest in king archetype at all. Since I was such a magician myself and really didn't know it, I had started by studying ritual processes in various spiritual traditions around the world. But from that, I began to study the anthropology of Victor Turner and looking into this idea of this transformative space, which incidentally you're experiencing this week. But Turner had studied this transformative space, and I began to realize, well, here it is in anthropology. Who among the psychologists is looking at this kind of space? And it turned out that I became aware of the work of John Perry, John Weir, W-E-I-R, Perry. He had done a book which he had titled The Royal Father. I think the Lord of the Four Quarters, Myths of the Royal Father. And when I began to look at this, I began to see what he had done is he had accumulated all of these stories of the myths of the true king. A lot of problems that people have with even talking about king is that human kings have often manifested more the shadow side of this archetype. But when you get into looking at the myths, you get a representation and story of the human longing. And this is one of the quotes from one of the texts that he had found. This is a translation from an ancient Egyptian hymn of the 2nd millennium BCE, a hymn to the Pharaoh. Thou hast stood as king upon the unyielding land, and caused it to flourish. In thy form as Ptah, the risen land, in your manifestation as the unifier, what your mouth created by speaking, what your hand shaped according to your heart, you have raised up out of the waters of chaos. And Perry in that book told of the feeling for the Pharaoh in those myths. And it was said of the Pharaoh that it was because of him that the young men could sleep at night. Because of him, the young men could sleep at night. There are many, so I recommend to you, I republished his book under the title Lord of the Four Quarters, The Mythology of Kingship, in the series I edited on Jungian psychology and world spirituality. Let's look at this sheet which we've passed out. I just want to do again here what we've done before. This is a diagram from this new edition, 2007 edition of The King Within. So again, I'm very impressed by the Mayan tradition. And on the front of this book is a Mayan king. We're looking down at the top of a Mayan pyramid. As you know, on the top of a Mayan pyramid, there's a place of a temple. And that's what is represented here by the space of the optimal personal self, what I call the optimal system self. So each one of these archetypes we've been talking about, you start from the bottom of this pyramid to represent lack of integration, and work your way toward more and more integration. More integration requires that the four systems, the four quarters, operate synergistically together. And let's go to the base of the pyramid on the king facet now. Whereas the warrior would be mere aggression at the lowest point, the magician mere knowledge, the lover mere embodiment. At the lowest level, the king archetype reflects mere power. And some of the evolutionary psychologists talk about those as dominant systems, grounded in your sociobiology, dominant systems. Well, the capacity to exert power manifest in immature forms is merely the intent or the capacity to dominate, mere power. But as that royal energy begins to integrate and begins to deploy, I love the word deploy about these archetypal systems, because they are present but unevoked early in childhood. And if the nurturance is there, then the potential begins to deploy. And so as this king potential begins to deploy, then comes the capacity for ordering chaos and provision of resources. And so the capacity to begin to shape an order that might reflect, when it's really matured, might more fully reflect justice. It's very interesting how these quadrants relate to classical senses of virtues. Courage is a warrior virtue. Prudence, or the capacity to think about the implications of your actions in the future, is a magician virtue. Temperance, the ability not to be undone by the pleasures you seek, is a lover virtue. But justice is a royal virtue. And so at deepest, at the heart of the mythic reality of the archetype of the king is a longing to move toward a just order. In many traditions, the royal throne is directly connected with an eternal sense of the law, the right order. In Egypt, it was ma'at. In Hebrew tradition, it was Torah. And in Chinese traditions, it would be seen as the Tao. And you can go on and on and on, but there's a sense of the connection with the true king, with a just intent for the cosmic order. So that begins, and so hence the concern to be able to make the land flourish so that people have food and they have plenty. So the image of abundance that is associated. Remember when the Grail came in, it's almost like a cornucopia. The sense of abundance begins to pour forth resources, provisions. As this capacity integrates in a more mature way, there is an increasing capacity for centering and calmness. Many people who meditate in a lotus position, seeking the deep, true center, do not realize that they are doing in what might be seen in effect as a royal yoga, a capacity to sit in the throne at the center of the world, which is a still point amongst the four quarters of the turning world. So, if you are a man with some adequate connection to this royal center, you will not have an intense anxiety disorder. So when you see somebody with runaway anxiety, you know how alienated they are from this part of the personality. But as this capacity matures, then a moral flourishing results, and this is the capacity for inclusive caring, the cold and heartless triage. You know triage? Triage is when you're going to decide who you're going to leave out. and you're not going to care about the one that cannot clamor for what they need. This is the story in the Christian myth, the reference to the Good Shepherd, because the story of the Good Shepherd in the Gospels is a reference to a messianic royal virtue. And that is, there may be 99 sheep already in the fold, but the Good Shepherd is aware that one is missing and will put forceful resources to work in finding that one who might be lost. So the capacity for inclusive caring is at the heart, and then flourishing with that is a strength-based power to bless. So at the flourishing of this royal capacity in the female or the male soul is the capacity to bless others and bless the world in the stewardship of the power that this person has. And you can tell when the royal sector is not matured by the absence of efforts to bless. So I need to just touch on a few of the shadow elements. The most common one, of course, you know it's shadowy if you're displacing your royal systems in projection on someone else. We've already talked about dependency disorders. So if you're giving your power away, that is course marks of a dysfunctional royal sector in the personality. But we know the pathological royal more in its overt expression, in what we call, in my business as a psychoanalyst, the narcissistic personality disorder. The narcissistic personality disorder acts as if he is the center of the world and that the world exists for him. In classical stories, that kind of figure is known as the cannibal king that eats the world for himself. And so the narcissistic personality disorder, very interestingly, according to what I've already said, is not as anxious as other pathologies. They are much calmer, and they tend to attract people who are more dependent to them, like flies or like moths to a light. So you will notice if you have an empty space in your psyche for this king development should be, you will notice that when a narcissist comes around or a sociopath comes around, your knees start to get weak and you start wanting to kneel. I'm serious. It happens all the time. That's how so many monster boys manage to rule in the world. But I am forever trying to say to therapists, do not hate these men. Do not hate them. They have access to an energy which, if they are aided in maturing and having that initiated, then they would have a great forcefulness to bring to the nurturance of the world. And so when I look at any of these quadrants and I see the dysfunction, I'm not interested in stopping there. I'm wanting to know, well, how can we help that person find a way to take that energy and mature it, regulate it, make it work for himself in a more creative way, and thereby work for others. So when this energy, this royal energy, is manifesting in a powerful but shadow form, there is no empathy. This person has no empathy, has no interest whatsoever in your needs. You exist merely as what we know in my business as a self-object extension. You are a part of me, and therefore I can do with you as I wish. And if you do not cop to that, if you do not agree to simply be an expression of me, then you're nothing to me. Then you're nothing to me. And so there's a lack of empathy. This person for whom the royal energy is present but not matured cannot love. So we have a context for the story. This energy, if I had a lot more time, I would talk about the grandiosity that I wrote about in my Facing the Dragon book. But the narcissistic personality disorder and personality systems resembling it are full of grandiose God energies, golden energies. They're full of grail energies, but they've identified with it. They think they own it. They seek to franchise it. And so, in wrapping up here, I would just say that we need to understand that a transformation can occur even in the grandiose young would-be prince, like the young Parsifal, very grandiose, does not realize it. But if that grandiosity can be confronted in a way that does not destroy him in the shame, if that grandiosity can be confronted and contained, it may be transformed into creativity and the capacity to care for the world. So I will stop there and open it up. I've got, I wanted to have, let's see, we got about 5 more minutes, something like that. Is that right? Okay. I wanted to emphasize that once that narcissism is transformed into maturity, then the ego no longer has to eat the world. In fact, this personality can understand what it means to make an offering which is beyond its own narcissistic needs. That is the heart of the mature person spiritually. Every mature spiritual master has the capacity to will and act in a way which transcends their own narcissistic needs. And that in traditional cultures has been identified as sacrifice. So this is why the archetype of sacrifice is at the heart of so many spiritual traditions around the world, because humans have known that the capacity to begin to make an offering beyond your own arrogance is at the heart of realized humanity. One thing a lot of us guys do, and I'll just cop to this for myself, there are a lot of guys that just cut off any of their royal and warrior stuff and just don't show it. They take refuge in the magician sort of lover sector of the psyche. I'm not saying this is you. But I'm just saying that instead of ever developing the ability to be in a confrontation with another person, not just women, but to be in that confrontation without being homicidal, and being in that confrontation without really making oneself suicidal by not protecting oneself. There are a lot of guys who cut the whole active aspects of the male self off in order to survive. And what they will do is what I did for many years is I would just sort of be like the Wizard of Oz, and I would just disappear into that magician. Nothing can enrage a woman more than she's trying to confront the man, trying to engage him, and he sort of, suddenly she notices, this thing sitting here with me is not really him. This is an android. That guy put an android in here to deal with me. I'm not kidding you. And often they could not articulate that I just said, but but they think this is not a real person. And so then they'll start to escalate their attacks to see if this thing can sustain some punishment or whether they will crack and the real guy will step out. So a lot of us become opaque and we are not visible. When I did the Mankind Project weekend and I was asked to choose a name, an animal name, I chose President Lion, because in so much of my life I have been opaque and not present, not accessible behind my magician capacities. Oh, you have a problem? I don't understand. So I'm not saying that's you, but I'm saying it is possible to be so conflict averse that you don't put anything out there of your true self that might lead somebody to want to bump up against you. Yeah. And we call that, in psychoanalysis, when we handle things that way, we call it the false self system.
On Christmas Day, the whole company at Carl Jung gathered to celebrate. Bright with banners and tapestries and the wild holly boughs that were festooned around the hall. The walls were made still brighter by the richly embroidered garments of the assembled lords and ladies. A great fire blazed in the hearth close to the throne, where King Arthur sat in state with his queen beside him. Parsifal was ushered into this noble company, still wearing all of his red armor except the helmet which he carried in the crook of his arm. He came bemused and uncertain before the throne, where King Arthur greeted him warmly.
I have a duty to perform that gives my heart great pleasure. Bring me my sword Excalibur. Sweet friend, against all likelihood, you knew it your destiny to be my champion. And now with all due ceremony, I would make you truly my knight. Let the trumpets sound.
From a balcony, stunned with wonder, Parsifal heard a royal voice declaiming in the silence of the hall.
Parsifal of Wales, rightful king of Anjou and lord of Bel Repair, I, Arthur, high king of all the lands and isles of Britain, bid you kneel and swear fealty as a true knight.
Parsifal dropped to his knee before the smiling king. He lowered his head, and just as he waited for the touch of the sword on his shoulder, the reverential silence of the court was shattered. Angry at this violation of the solemn moment, the king demanded,
What noise there? Who dares disturb the king's peace so?
The whole murmuring of the court fell silent as the most loathsome female figure that had ever rode into the hall that the people had ever seen. She was dressed in a crumpled bridal gown. She sat with a crooked back on a bony mule, clutching a whip in her right hand. A long plait of coarse hair dangled from her head, but it was her face that appalled everyone to silence. Or was it a hideous mask she wore? It resembled less the features of a woman than the savage, bristled snout of a wild boar. The dogs in the court cowered at her approach.
By what right do you interrupt us, madam?
I, country the sorceress, demand by what right do you desecrate the sovereignty of Britain?
I counsel you to speak more fairly to our king.
Be silent, go away!
I forgive you, madam, for I presume from your manner that you are not always in possession of your mind.
My wits are truer than the traitor heart of one here, king.
Who among my friends do you dare name traitor?
Who else? For that play? Possible.
Kundry, that knight is among the worthiest of my companions.
Then you are betrayed by his fair manner and his fair faith. You think me monstrous king, but I tell you that the base wretch before you is more monstrous than I. Does he not foul the honor of the arms he bears?
Those arms were won defending my honor.
Peace, fool! Do you think I don't know that he slew the Red Knight, and by what ignominious means? Do I not also know that the Red Knight was kin to your father, and a man of your own blood? Yes, it was your kinsman that you killed, though you are unworthy to wash the feet of his dishonored corpse.
I swear this was unknown to me.
Swallow your tongue, Sir Ignorance, for it wags when you should keep silent, but when you should speak, ha! What then?
Speak plainer yourself, madam.
Then you shall know it, king. You shall know the terrible truth of it. This wretch was admitted to the presence of the grave at Mont Sauvage. He sat at the wounded side of Anfortas and dined with him of the beauty of the Grail. Yet he failed to put the question that would have freed the rich fisherman from his pay.
But I didn't know. No one told me. I would have asked. I wanted to ask, but I had been told not to ask questions. A man who was as a father to me counseled me against it.
And do you only do what you are told? Is obedience the only wisdom? Has the heart no knowledge of its own? Or were the sufferings of Anfortas not grievous enough to move a heart that must be made of stone? Do you lack all compassion, wretch? What else to expect from one callous enough to cause his own mother's death? Do words fail you again, fool? Yet look into his face, king, see the guilt that stalks his eye.
Can this be true, Parsifal? Speak. You must defend yourself.
This mum-chant dunce is ignorance incarnate. Why, he even has a brother he knows nothing of. Yet that elder son of Garumet has won greater honor with his dark skin than this simpleton of light has ever known.
Parsifal, you must speak.
How should he speak? For the sword was put into his hand. The lance and the table were shown to him, and the hallowed grail itself, yet he uttered not a word. His silence condemned him then, and it condemns him now. I cry great shame on you, Parsifal, the wretched, in all the eyes of all the world, for the wound still festers at the Grail King's thigh, and that land still languishes through your bitter fault.
But how shall grave fault be mended, Kundry?
It cannot be mended. Not unless the right man finds his way to Mont Sauvage.
Then I'll go back there. I have failed once, but I shall not fail the test again.
You've thrown away your chance, fool. Such is the elusive nature of Mont Sauvage that it withholds itself from all who deliberately seek it.
Still, I shall seek it out.
Then see what becomes of your
I think you should return to your wife, friend.
But don't you see? That's the true hell of it. How can I show my face at Bell Repair with my honour gone? There can be no thought of happiness for me until I have found that place they call the Grail again.
Did you not hear what Kundry said? As long as you look for that place, it will elude you. We must look to God in his goodness for a favorable outcome.
God. God. Would you speak to me of God? Once I thought myself his true knight, but now I find I have only been God's fool. Do not put your trust in God. He will only play you false.
May God forgive you.
Believe me, beyond your lance and sword, there's only one thing to be trusted in this world, which is the truth of a woman's love.
Parson, you cannot leave like this.
There's no other way. I wish you well, my friends. I do not know if we shall ever meet again.
One is the eternal tension between hubris and nemesis. That is to say, when we are emerging as a self, as a personality, we're emerging out of this incredibly energy-filled matrix. And if you look at my Facing the Dragon book, I talk about this a lot in there. You're really coming out of a cauldron of these god energies, dragon energies. The child is really loaded with archetypal energy. And as you're emerging, the trick is, of course, to not lose touch with all that juice. Because if you lose touch with the juice, then you will have a kind of a chronic depression. And there are a lot of people who lose touch with the juice that just die. So, but you got to remember, you're emerging out of a merger with all this dragon energy. And hubris, that is the insight that the Greeks had, that when you are engaging in pride, and the important thing here to understand is that the most dangerous grandiosity is not when you are aware you're grandiose. Almost all of the really destructive, grandiose possession states are unconscious. So that's what we know. We like to think that those narcissistic personalities are aware of how arrogant they are. But the truth is they're not really aware. And so what we've got here is this young, radiant young guy, and he is in touch with all this archetypal masculine juice, and it has blown him up. He's been riding on this. And a lot of the time when you're riding on this archetypal golden juice, you really think that's your true self, when in fact you're just inflated. You've not really constructed an actual true self yet. You've not been able to develop it and build it and shape it and sculpt it yet. You haven't sculpted your authentic true self yet. So one thing that's going on here is if he's going to actually become a transformed, mature man, he's going to have an encounter with the grandiose energies in his shadow. And I've spent a lot of time recently trying to show how grandiose energies come in each of these quadrants. It's not just the royal guy that's all blown up that's grandiose. You can be grandiose in the magician. You can be grandiose in the lover. You can be grandiose in the warrior. So it's inevitable, if you're going to individuate and be transformed into an optimal male self, that you're going to have to encounter your grandiosity, and it never feels good
when you begin to have awareness or somebody points out to you where you have really been inflated. Jung, and this is something we should keep in mind today and tonight. I mean, Jung pointed out any time that you really are doing shadow work, we throw the word shadow work around a lot in men's work, but when you're really encountering your shadow, you are going to feel some revulsion about what you're now coming to know about yourself. And so when you're really coming to know your shadow, the whole hope is not that you disappear into any shame or disappear into the pain, which sometimes you do. Sometimes men suicide at that point. But to be able to still function cognitively as the truth is coming at you. And that's easier said than done. So now think about this. Men would rather fight a whole division of enemy tanks than to deal with an enraged woman that they're in an intimate relationship with. In fact, that's why they're so eager to go off to war a lot of the time. Because one of the great, realities about men of our day is how terrified they are of women when the women have some power and some strength and hurl the lance of the woman's truth, her truth, at us. And I've mentioned a couple of times John Lee's work. He's constantly pointing out the way in which we men, when the woman in our life, whoever the most special woman in our life is, begins to criticize, John points out that we almost always start declining in age. And fairly quickly, we're 3 years old. We're just shrinking and terrified. And this at the point, where domestic violence from the male side starts is when the man loses connection with his grown-up personality. And in the face of the criticism coming from a woman that's got some firepower, which is all of them, when it's coming at him, he is immobilized very often until the point where the rage kicks in, and then he will become often physically violent. So that physical violence comes out of a man who's collapsing into his weakness and self-doubt. So I'll spend a good deal of time with men trying to help them learn that if you're going to maintain a relationship with a woman, and this would be true for gay lovers as well, when your partner starts to come at you, as they inevitably will, with disappointment and displeasure, I try to tell men, you need to have your heart protected here. I'll say, you need to do a little active imagination, visualizing a little Kevlar suit. You know what Kevlar is? That's bulletproof, that you button up in. Because if you leave your heart uncovered when the lances are being thrown with great force and accuracy to get your attention, then you will regress and you will not be able to function cognitively. In other words, you will not be able to listen. Now, we would like to think that all of the lances that are thrown our way are, as Parsifal kind of feels, this is, what do you say, unjust treatment? What is the word?
Unjust.
Yeah.
And God's own light.
Yes. And of course, when the salvos start to come, there is a lot of wrong stuff in it. But that's not the most important part of what's in it. If a man is actually going to do his shadow work, then he needs to practice on being able to prevent himself from dying in the face of this onslaught, having his heart completely broken, so he has to end the relationship. I always say to a man, protect your heart or you will end the relationship. You don't protect your heart, you will end the relationship. It may take you a while, depending on how masochistic you are, but you will end the relationship. But protect your heart not so you do not feel anything. You'll be feeling plenty with that Kevlar over your heart. You'll feel plenty. I just don't want you to be in such death pain that you cannot think and listen. A lot of the research now shows that when the fear comes up and the anxiety comes up, the actual brain circuits to the ears shut down. Have you ever thought when people kind of get hot at each other that you've noticed they don't listen? Well, now the neurophysiologists have actually proven that that's the case. So we need to keep you protected enough at your heart level so that your brain does not shut down. And Parsifal at this point then, you know that point you made about the transpersonal knowledge? So here's the feminine aspect of the unconscious being danced out by this crone. And the deepest part of the feminine is going to have the deepest awareness of the male shadow. Just as you will often have more awareness of the woman's shadow than she does. So there's some male part of you that is aware of the woman's shadow, often much more than she is, and often much more than her therapist is aware of it. So the key issue here is being able to continue to listen, because if he cannot listen for the truth in that salvo, even if it's only 10% or 5% of the incoming, then he is not being aided in doing his shadow work and learning where he's blind. So this is really hard thing for men. Here we see this young guy. This is hot. This is heavy artillery coming at him here from the deep, dark feminine. But a number of you pointed out that this Kundry, she's pretty accurate about a lot of stuff. She is not pulling her punches, though. And I would wonder if any of you've noticed that the female of our species, when angry, will often not hold anything back. In other words, the attack will often be extremely ferocious and listing the litany of the things from the past, as you were saying, which was really right. And so it's a huge male achievement to be able to maintain the critical listening, to listen for the gold in there, in those comments, in that attack, for him to be able to see where is she right about this. It's horrific to me how often the women in my life, while overdoing the attack, have been pointing to things that I desperately needed to know, but could not know at the time. See, so I think there's the gold in this piece of the story for us. We don't have to say, well, boy, she was very balanced in what she said to him, because the force was not. I mean, this was full on, and we were all shrinking. Ooh, that poor guy.
do you have to have, before you can be king, do you have to have like the warrior, the magician, and the lover all in?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Precisely.
So out of that part,
Thank
the
you.
lover part was the part I don't kind of get.
Okay.
So I got the protection.
Okay.
I got the
See, you don't have empathy. See, he's still not showing much empathy. He has not been able. That's what she's saying to him. You don't have any empathy. Where's your heart? So his lover thing is not fully online yet. But I think that you just really, you cracked the code there, because you're not going to be a mature king without those other systems functioning. I mean, you can have lots of swagger.
My question was, so this was what I was processing during the week was, because when we say, have you been initiated into your warriorhood? And there's aspects like, well, yes, I've got,
Certain.
this
Yeah.
together, but I don't quite have
That.
this and this together. So if you're asking the question, does that mean you were initiated at all, or is there different phases?
No. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right to point this out. In each of these systems, I mean, there's a lot of science on this now, but in each of these systems, these archetypal systems, there are things bundled together in there. There are clusters of capacities bundled together. And the way it actually works most of the time is we begin to access those capacities one by one until the thing fleshes out. And we would look now at each of us, and we would be able to tell how much this system is operating and which elements of it are left out and still need to be integrated. But I think you're getting it. You're getting it. I think that's an accurate portrayal. So it's not, well, now I can kick somebody's ass as a martial artist. Now I've got a warrior inflation. Well, you've got an important part. But when you're standing in a relationship with a really angry woman, then we will find out how well your warrior's initiated.
For sure. Thank you.
I'd like to just spend a few minutes talking about the lover quadrant of capacities in a male psyche. And just as we talked about how the warrior, it is most, if you think about this in terms of developmental levels, what the capacities exist, the warrior at its lowest level is just mere aggression. You see it in its pure form and rage. If it develops some, then you have the capacity to form some boundaries. If it keeps developing, you get the capacity for focus and discipline. If it keeps developing, you get the capacity to protect that which should be protected. And if it flourishes, then you really get into a valuing authentic service and mission to others. Just as you've got that kind of developmental integration of these capacities and values, in the lover, you start with mere embodiment. The capacity to be in your embodiment. Freud famously talked about the child as being polymorphous perverse. That is, it loves to play with feces and anything. There's no such thing as revulsion, a feeling of revulsion for a young child. I like to say, why be a Puritan about that? Why say, polymorphous perverse? Why don't you just say polyerotic? Because the lover is that part in a man's soul that, given a chance, it loves everything. Trees, whales, you name it. And it has the capacity to take delight in. That's one of the chief ways you know how you're doing on this lover thing. How often do you have the experience of taking delight in anything? I just ask you to think about that for a minute and think about the last time you took delight in something or someone, because that is huge. And hopefully, if this, I call these all lines of development, 4 lines of development. You know, Freudians just think there's 1 line of development. Cohoutians think there are 2 lines of development. I think there are 4. And they are represented by these quadrants. But if you're on this lover line of development, at the top level of this, when it's there in its fullness, you just live in a lot of joy, a lot of the time.
Is taking delight the same thing as experiencing joy?
It's not yet, but it's connected at its roots. That is to say, I may take delight, and I may be a stamp collector. And I may have, I may be the coldest fucker around anywhere. But when I open my stamp collection and I see this one particular stamp that's the best, I can take enormous delight in that. Now, I never depreciate that. Because if I'm working with a man, I want to know if there's anything that he's aware of taking delight in. Because if there is something he can name, then I say, aha, the lover is opening up in you. We just have to widen the areas where that potential can be experienced. So anyway, as you get past this mere embodiment, the capacity not to be repulsed by anything, there's no shame in the lover, in the healthy lover. That lover, that archetypal energy itself, it doesn't have any wiring for shame. And I like to say, if you got this stuff online, you can play and you can display. So if you see a bunch of people dancing naked to some ecstatic music, that's play and display. No shame. See? And so if you keep on, if gradually, as you get to where you can enjoy the sensuality of your body, that's a huge achievement. There are a lot of us men who, because of all kinds of early shaming and early abuse, don't have the capacity to connect with any of the joy in the erotic embodiment. And I've always said that when a man gets to where he can masturbate, this is an achievement. And I've worked with a lot of men who have had pornography addictions. And we can shame these men, but what you got to understand is the capacity for them to even experience the erotic through porn is an enveloping of this potential in them. It's tragic that they can only feel anything through that. But I have worked for a long time in analysis with men who, when they came to see me, the only connection they had to anything in their heart was a satchel full of pornography. They could relate to images of breast. They could relate to images of vaginas. They didn't have very much capacity to feel any tenderness toward any of it, but it brought something up in them. And after a long time of interpretation, working with that, gradually the capacity to feel any erotic aliveness gradually grows until, lo and behold, you see, in pornography, the feminine is broken up into all sorts of images. And the person has not yet been able to actually relate to an integrated, embodied feminine yet. They can't experience that yet. So as the heart begins to open, the capacity actually to feel intimacy develops. And hopefully not long after it, the capacity to feel tenderness. Now, it sounds like in the story that Parsifal was at a place where he could feel tender feelings toward this young woman. So I just want to emphasize how the capacity to feel tender feelings, what an achievement it is psychologically. The whole of Freud's whole theory was how hard it is for people, certainly for us men, to separate their aggression from their affection and to experience them in an appropriate, mature way, so you do not have to be sadistic to express your erotic. You follow me? So as that grows, then this capacity for intimacy and the capacity to belong, Paul Tillich calls it the capacity for participation. You know, the going away part is all well and good, but if you're going to have your heart open and you're going to be human, you've got to learn how to be able to participate with other humans. And so this opening to participation can begin with an individual, but then it develops into the capacity actually to experience belonging to a community. So the capacity even to feel yourself belonging to any community is an opening of the heart. It's an opening of the capacity to love. And then, as I said earlier, when this potential is flowering, you don't just take occasional delight. You don't just enjoy here and there. At these flowering stages, you get like you be around someone like the Dalai Lama. You can tell that he has a lot of joy if you're around him. You can tell he has a lot of joy in spite of difficult things he has to deal with. And so there's that opening, you know, all of these aspects of the psyche. Jung kind of viewed them as the unfolding of an opening of a golden flower that had each of these quadrants in it. And so in this story, it's very interesting. He is able to see beauty. Now, that doesn't sound like much, but you got to think about it. How sensitive are you to the presence of beauty? It's like there are a lot of people who can be in extremely beautiful environments and not notice it. People who rush their way through a great art museum. So we see in that story he's beginning to be able really to appreciate beauty. In fact, the great philosopher Bernard Malin once called this capacity the capacity for an appreciative consciousness. The capacity to, when you look at something, be able to have a sense of appreciation of what is given. So that other little piece in there that some of you noted, we picked out in the story. When the heart of the man is opening, he begins to experience the capacity for empathy. When we're treating narcissistic personality disorders, one of the things we know about narcissistic personality disorders is they do not yet have the capacity to love. And with it, they do not have the capacity to experience empathy. That is, when they think about you, the only importance any feeling you might have is what it means to their narcissistic gratification. So as a person heals from being ill in that way, they gradually learn how to imagine how another person is feeling. And I thought it was rather elegant in this story. Parsival's capacity to remember what it was like to be shamed when he is making a decision about what he's going to do with the Duke. And it seems clear from the narrative that he experienced a fairly mature level of empathy there. It's horrific to be shamed. If I'm given a chance not to, then I will not shame this man. I will not shame him. This is why this virtue of respect is so important, because a cardinal rule for a man ought to be never, ever to shame anyone, if possible. For all kinds of reasons, but for this one as well. So Parsifal was able to see beauty, and he was able to experience empathy, and he was able to begin overcoming those maternal, overwritten boundaries. I cannot tell you how many times in my practice a man will bring in a dream. And the dream will be about an intimate encounter that he is either about to have or he is in the middle of, and then someone, often his mother, either comes in the house, walks in the room, in some way the intimate encounter is interrupted. In the story, we see it's almost like a flashback of the mother comes to him. It doesn't really quite spoil his encounter. But as I could tell in some of your comments that you were picking up on the fact that the mother training against the fullness of his eros is still an issue that he would have to work with. So let me just say a couple of things about expressions of the shadow lover. So we know that a man who's really cooking, I like to say cooking in these circuits, he knows how to have fun. He may be developing the capacity for a deep, sustaining joy. He will be comfortable in his body, and he is quite able to display himself physically without the spoiling effect of shame. And often that will come out in his being a good dancer. Will often come out in that respect. So what about shadow expressions of the lover? I'll start with a few, and then you feel free to. We won't say that it's your own original invention, but if you want to share some other thoughts, I'll just start with a few. Clearly, sexual addictions are a shadow lover phenomenon, and they're extremely widespread now. And addiction to internet porn is just epidemic now. And so certainly that's one. And actually addictions to anything are what I call shadow lover expressions. Because in the pathologies of the lover, there are pathologies. I teach therapists a lot about the pathologies of these different archetypal systems. The pathologies of the lovers almost always have to do with some kind of dependence, pathological dependence. That pathological dependence can be being pathologically dependent on your approval for me to feel okay. So there's what we call a histrionic personality, who you've met these people at cocktail parties. You're going around and meeting people. They will shake your hand, but they will not look you in the eye. They're with you, but they're scanning the room for a more attractive flower. Right? You've ever experienced that? That's what we call a histrionic personality disorder, because they're always trying to. It's what Fromm called a marketing personality. They're always trying to make a sale. But once they sell themselves to you, if you buy, then they're off to find somebody better than you to buy their product. So that's what we call an active dependency. That's a lover disorder. Then there's what's known as a dependency disorder, people giving away their power. See, the capacity to love at its deepest roots is the capacity to adore. So you can have problems in this sector by not being able to adore. So if you're not able to adore anyone or anything, you got work to do on this stuff, or play to do. You got play to do with this. But if you are compulsively adoring, setting the other on a pedestal, putting yourself down, experiencing the other as all-worthy and yourself as nothing, that is a lover disorder, because the lover will almost always idealize the other. And so if it's really flooding lover energy, it will often be paralyzed by the attractiveness of the object. Now that's a psychoanalytic phrasing. Paralyzed by the attractiveness of the object. That is, when you're in its presence, whatever it is, whether it's a person or a painting or whatever, your own initiative just disappears and you're paralyzed. So addictions, dependency disorders, the masochistic pole of sadomasochistic relationships. And I might add a very popular one, particularly with us guys, is numbness. Just being numb. That's the passive pole of a lover that is so powerful and unbalanced by other parts of the psyche that one cannot be allowed to feel. One of the tragic things I think about men's experience is that some men that experience a lot of pain a lot of the time, right? A lot of emotional pain. The thing that preoccupies them the most is their wound. Sometimes in the Mankind Project, we call it wound worship. And the sad thing is that a man who has a lot of emotional pain has huge lover capacities, huge lover potentials. And the sad thing is he has not been aided yet to have the containment of these archetypes, these other archetypes, so that he can actually enjoy the power of his heart. This is the kind of person, that when they walk in a room, they feel everybody's pain. And there are a lot of people who are simply receivers for awareness of pain, themselves and others. a lot of the time these persons will have a lot of physical pain in their body, chronic physical pain in the body. And so I like to work with trying to help people see the strengths of what they have in their organization. So, I have a lover guy come to see me. I will start immediately reframing the degree to which he can experience his pain in others, because that is an achievement. It's just that it's a capacity that he's not yet integrated as a male self enough to be able to really enjoy it to the fullest. But it is possible for him to do so. Well, I don't take that personally. I just find that rather an interesting behavior. Well, it may be meant personally. You see, that kind of interaction, because, it may be, because the histrionic is looking around the room to see if there's a more attractive flower than you. And if somebody's just not looking in your eyes, he just may be into his dominance mode and just wanting to humiliate you, and not even bothering to focus on the fact that he's seeking to humiliate you. There are a lot of people like that. But a histrionic person doesn't feel complete in themselves. And if you decide that you love them, they decide that they don't want you. But now let me just stay with this a second, because I only have a minute or two. Is there anything else you would add to what you would include that a man that can do blank, or who manifests this characteristic, has got a lot of mature lover stuff? Yeah.
For me, my lover side comes out of cooking. So the cooking and love food.
And that gets us, thank you for that, cooking, because that actually gets us to the other thing I wanted to kind of close with. Will you share with us all the things that you've done which have helped you embody this lover energy? Cooking. Now, see, I admire you. I always say, admire the guys that can do things that you're not that good at, and so that you can try to be more like them. In my old age, I hope to get to where I can cook, because I think that's really becoming a good cook is a great way to let the lover come out in all kinds of dimensions. So thank you for that. Others, yeah.
To be able to improvise with music and rhythm.
Ah, yes. Playing music. Right, exactly. Others.
Gardening?
Gardening is another big one. In fact, the image of the different spaces, of the archetypal spaces, there's the field of battle we've been hearing about. But the garden is really a great image, and always has been a great image for the lover. And gardening is, it requires a pretty mature lover, because you really got to care about the plants, right? Other comments of things that you have experienced that have opened you up.
Dresses.
Fashion. A sense about how you can, yeah.
What a lot of gay guys see.
Yeah.
That's his list.
Yeah. Yeah. Some of you may need to have some gay guys for a mentor, because they have a sense of being able, they see beauty. In fact, they already know how beautiful you are. And straight guys, they're so homophobic that it would freak them out if somebody noticed how beautiful they are. And if you want to get a sense of a male soul incidentally embodied in a homosexual man, Walt Whitman, the American poet Walt Whitman, he sees the beauty everywhere. And reading his Leaves of Grass, let me give you a little sense of that. Any other thoughts back here?
I was thinking of the Navajo people who were fierce warriors, also have lots of prayer about the beauty way.
The beauty way, absolutely. All that Navajo spirituality about the beauty way, you can just see how advanced, how well developed the sense of the lover is. And that's very much expressed in many traditional cultures certainly in Native American culture, but it's widespread. One of the things that you can be aware of is that in ancient cultures where ritual hadn't died, they tend to all have much more sense of beauty and than contemporary modern Westerners. He just wants to put his tongue in everything. I mean, and you know what? There's no such thing as get this now. The archetypal lovers is not heterosexual, it's polysexual. And it knows nothing about fidelity whatsoever. So there's no fidelity in the lover system. So for a man such as yourself to use any technique to be able to regulate the power of his own attractiveness and the power of his own attraction to others. Look, I'm always working with people, you've got to regulate or your life will go down the tubes. The lover energy is the ultimate solvent, solvent. It will dissolve all structures. And so when you open up to this lover thing, you got to have somebody else present. The warrior in you knows about fidelity. It's the only system in the psyche that knows about fidelity. So you gotta, if you don't numb out, you've at least got to find some way to constantly be asking yourself, okay, this is what I love. I always have all these guys that, if a woman wants to have sex with them, that woman can have them. And I said, well, does it ever occur to you that if this woman wants to have sex with you, that you are not duty-bound to have sex with her? That maybe you want to think about what you're trying to do in your life and see if this fits? Because you're not the only one that has that. So when you get initiated in the lover, this lover, he's an unruly guy. One of my analysans has given this part of him the name hound dog. And so, hound dog, hound dog is just always sniffing, man. I mean, and that part of you, look, just be clear, you're a primate. If you're a healthy ape, every time some attractive ape comes by, your whole physiological presence the bells are gonna ring in there. That doesn't mean you're a bad guy or a sex addict. It just means you're a healthy ape. And but men have to learn how not to let the erotic destroy their entire world. So anyway, I got to stop there because we're out of time. I'm happy to kick this around with you at other times, but I appreciate your sharing with me, and I wish we had more time. But well, here we complete the circle. At the quadrant, the magician quadrant, that is really where I began my investigations. I hope you've got your diagram from The King Within, the 2007 edition. We've been walking our way. I like to say that a mature man is someone who can, like that mythic king, dance the four quarters. You may have seen that image of Shiva dancing. Well, there's a way in which your soul can learn to dance the four quarters, and now we're at this magician quadrant. When I was a young scholar, in my humility, wanting to finish Jung's work, I saw myself, I I didn't really see myself as working on masculine psychology at all. I set out to complete Jung's investigations into the mysteries of the occult. And so I started doing a lot of field work, as I may have mentioned to you before, going out and observing and being a participant observer in all sorts of ritual processes around the world in different spiritual tribes, different tribes of ritual magic, and looking at all modes of ritual practice. A lot of young people were getting involved in cults in those days, and many people were antagonistic toward them and saw the the practices they did as demonic and making people crazy. So I went out and started to try to investigate and learn about these things, and so I was surprised that when I got inside the world of people who had a lot of experience in practicing ritual, I was surprised at how much thought and depth there were among so many of these people. Here I was a psychotherapist, and I once sat, I was invited to go along on this occult practitioners healing encounter, and this occult practitioner, there was a young schizophrenic that he brought in, and I was terrified because this young schizophrenic was about 6'6" and weighed about 240 pounds, and I was expecting a psychotic break, but this ritual practitioner was able to take this young man on an inner journey, which enabled him to confront some of his demons. He did it very skillfully, much more skillfully than many of my supervisors as a therapist. And then he brought him out, and so I was learning some new respect, and so I continued looking at that. After a long time, thousands of hours of this participant observation, it began to be clear to me that in this world of ritual and in this world of esoteric practices, that there was a clear structure, that there were elements that were always present. This was, people had studied all this stuff, but it became quite clear that whenever you're in transformative space, you will have a ritual elder. There will be someone in the role of a ritual elder. And when you're needing a transformative space, you will start to seek out a ritual elder, a Trevisan. You often do not even know that's what you're seeking, but you will start looking for the vessel, the transformative space. You will start looking for that space, and that is almost always in the presence of a ritual elder, someone who carries some wisdom and also some knowledge about death and rebirth. The archetype of initiation really is about the process of transformation of death and rebirth. And so the ritual elder is the steward of transformative space. In the story, you didn't hear this part, but in the story, this is a circle of stones around this fire. So it's a sacred circle that Trevisan is kneeling before. And so if you begin to study, as I did many years ago, comparative traditions with regard to sacred space, you will see that it's a very unique space. And so you have the archetype of death and rebirth, you have the sacred space, and you have the ritual elder who is to be the steward. A steward who lets you come into that space and will turn up the heat the alchemical fire will turn up the heat under your vessel and cook off a lot of the impurities until you are done. That is, done well enough. And then he will kick you out of that space. In other words, a decent ritual elder will not let you stay at the fire forever. You have to get out and face the world again. So if you look at this diagram, here again we're going down to the base of that Mayan pyramid that we're looking down on. And on this magician face, you begin with mere knowledge. There are a lot of very, very smart people who know a lot. And yet they do not have the moral or spiritual or emotional resources to be good stewards of their knowledge for the world. And as we sit here, there are extremely brilliant people over the world who are putting all of their creative energies into ways to manipulate people, to create entities, machines, substances that are extremely toxic to human life. Enormous amounts of money are going into all sorts of technical knowledge that is without soul. Paul Tillich, again, saw it coming. He said that ontological wisdom, that is true knowledge of the depths of being, has been far outstripped by technical knowledge. That's a runaway magician. A runaway magician. It's not that we do not welcome learning and knowledge, but we are falling behind in terms of the character that needs to be developed in order to be stewards of that knowledge. It's a huge problem now. And with the internet, the power of the internet is so much magician power. And the shadow side of the internet, not its positive side, but the shadow side, is the way in which it often can kind of turn a man into an extension of a machine. So anyway, as you begin in mere knowledge, you have no concern for healing. You don't really even have any concern for making a great contribution to your fellow humans and other creatures. You are into the love of knowledge for its own sake. And that's a primal place. If you mature in this, you begin to become aware of that archetype of initiation, that the necessity for transformation, not only of yourself, but of systems, of families, of systems, of organizations, of the world. But in order for there to be a truly transformative process, someone has to have the capacity to steward the transformative process, and therefore wisdom is needed. In every culture and every tribal tradition, there have been wisdom figures, people who we've known as the sage, the person who develops the shamanic knowledge. Now again, this doesn't mean that all the people who get powerful in magic are good. I thought the Lord of the Rings did a wonderful job of showing the ambivalence of magician power. Because in that Gandalf is the figure who gradually over the period that we see him matures and matures and matures into a rather luminous manifestation of the mature magician. So you got to develop your wisdom. And then we saw Gandalf struggling to really get himself fully centered in his wisdom and what he knew. And he had to kind of go through his own death and rebirth in order to get there. But as this potential flowers, when this sector of your psyche flowers, you get this wisdom that's good enough to be offered to help others, and then you can turn to being a healer with it. So the richest, most golden flower of the magician sector and the magician line of development is when you can bring the power of your mind and the power of your understanding, the power of your knowledge as an offering to a suffering world. This is the shamanic realization. You're not a sorcerer who, like so much in contemporary Madison Avenue and other centers of advertising, you know, there are more people that study this kind of material that we're studying. There are more people in the corporate world who are highly trained in this stuff, and they are using this knowledge to learn how to manipulate people by appealing to their archetypal depths. And I submit to you that if you want to see sophisticated, manipulative use of archetypal patterns, you simply watch commercials. Really sophisticated commercials. And it's extremely widespread and growing, and they're getting much more sophisticated, and the power of their capacity to manipulate archetypal energies is huge. And so if the folk that want to really try to counteract that kind of sorcery, you have to know about these things too, just like Gandalf. So the question of right intention is huge. And it is the question of right intention that distinguishes a sorcerer from someone who carries knowledge in a way that is in the mature shamanic kind of capacity for healing. So at the top of this Mayan pyramid, as you approach that temple on top, you see these highest virtues of these lines of development within you. On the one hand, you have a truly chivalrous knight. You have an ecstatic, joyful lover. You have a powerful, compassionate, caring, and blessing king. And you have this fiercely loving, shamanic, healing wisdom figure. Now, what about shadow? What about shadow? I wanted to, in this Facing the Dragon book, I talked about the different forms of hell, that grandiosity forms in each of these different quadrants. And I just wanted to read you a little piece here about the magician hell before we look at I'm about out of time here.
No, we started late.
Okay.
We got 10, 15 minutes.
Dragon energy manifested in the magician or magus archetype causes you to be strangely emotionally detached above it all. You think you have the right, correct, enlightened point of view, theory, ideology, theology, psychology, or spiritual tradition. You have the right one. And that if people would accept your version of truth, that is, doctrine, theory, ideology, or tradition, then everything would be okay. The now integrated spirituality of an enlightened and peaceful world would easily see that evil is no more than an illusion, held by those still unenlightened but marginal people who don't know what you know. Magician grandiosity cloaks a fundamental coldness, a lack of love and joy. and the denial of the horror of radical evil. With the erroneous perception that you are above it with your superior knowledge, you then try to avoid any responsibility for actually confronting it. You keep telling yourself that the horrible things happening in the world are just illusions, or that the world can only be improved by accepting your version of the truth. Only the abstract theoretical correctness of your belief system will suffice. This fantasy allows you to reject any notion of cooperating with others, that is, people who think differently from you, in urgently needed programs of compassion and justice. You see no need for a calm, centered, and blessing presence in the middle of all the chaos in family, community, nation, and planet. You see no need for joyful, embodied celebration of the preciousness of individual people. You see no need for wedding feasts, ecstatic erotic unions, messianic banquets, or sacramental dances of life. For all of those things require repulsive engagement with particular real people. Surely humanity can be redeemed without all that messiness. This is the magician form of dragon hell. That's when you're flooded by it, you know. There's another way to be flooded by it, and it's the, if you look in this part 5 of The King Within, I've got a section in there that shows the association of these archetypal energies with different psychopathology, different territories, different geographies of psychopathology. I do a lot of work about helping people understand there's a shape, there's a structure to psychopathology, and it's organized in these archetypal systems. So the kind of pathologies characterized by the magician are thought disorders. They are pathologies of detachment, people trying to back out of life and disappear into the woodwork. We've talked about some before. So in other words, if you tend to just stay the hell away from everybody, you got a lot of flooding magician. And all that wonderful magician energy you have is not being stewarded well. There's another thing. This flooding archetype will cause you to be a master of depreciation. You know, I like to say, you know, if it moves, you know, the lover will put his tongue in it. If it moves, of course, the magician is going to interpret it, but it's going to depreciate it. Alfred Adler said, really want to know how ill psychologically a person is, particularly in terms of how narcissistic they are, you will simply see how much they engage in the depreciation tendency. So when you have somebody that's always finding the fault with persons and things, that's a runaway magician. And often, you know, I like to say that when a magician is on full automatic, it comes off like a buzzsaw. And it's not a surgical scalpel. It cuts away all sorts of good tissue. And so if you hear people speak of your critic, the inner critic, this is coming out of the magician sector. Because this magician part of the psyche is never going to be satisfied with actuality. It's never going to bless when it's flooding and not balanced by those other archetypes. It is never going to look at you in the mirror and say, yes, you're beautiful. Never going to say that. They'll say, oh, you need a little work on your eyes here, a nip and a tuck. So detachment, depreciation, innocence, not knowing. Parsifal, when he starts out, he doesn't know. And he doesn't know his shadow. So the passive shadow of the magician is just not knowing. And you have met guys who wrap themselves in the cloak. Oh, I'm not an intellectual. One guy says to me, I don't read books. Wrapping themselves in not knowingness. Because if they let themselves know, then something might have to be transformed. See? And then we have that sorcerer I was speaking about, the malignant trickster. That's a guy by the name of Shastram once wrote a book about man the manipulator. And it was really about this malignant trickster aspect of the psyche. Now, when that trickster part, you need that trickster part in your personality. In fact, there's a lot of evidence now, scientific evidence, that it developed in order to help you survive an evolutionary process. You might think about it this way. If you don't have enough powerful trickster in your personality, you will not be able to see the grandiosity of others clearly enough, including those that want to manipulate you. So your trickster is the equipment you bring to enable you not to be overly impressed by somebody's power over you. And so the healthy trickster part of yourself will always enable you to be mentally free, even in a situation of oppression and tyranny. You will be able to be mentally free. And there are many trickster figures in world culture that embody that. So if the trickster is working without benefit of balance with these other sectors, then it will undermine everything you try to do. It will criticize every project. If you're one of those guys that has started projects, started businesses, and then it gets upended, and then you start another one, then it gets upended, then you start another one, and it gets upended. This flooding trickster will always destroy your cosmos, your world, before you're able to get all the foundations down securely and build from the base. And so if that's been happening to you, you just got to realize there's a perfectly wonderful archetypal energy in you that needs to be stewarded more consciously to help you resist being dominated by oppressors. But it should not be upending your building project. See? So, let's see, I believe that's okay.
Can I just ask a question? Are you saying that that's self-sabotage?
Yes, self-sabotage is this trickster operating, I like to say, on full automatic. And it's just, it doesn't wait for the royal part of yourself to say, come here, I got something that needs to be confronted. Or confront me, when you're granted, you don't say, if you're having it confront you and you're using your own trickster to see through your own, grandiosity is working right. But if it just starts to work without being invoked, then that is when you sabotage yourself. And we have this personality description. We call it the self-defeating personality disorder.
So there are two sides to the trickster.
Yeah, so like all archetypal energies, there's a shadow side of it, and there's the conscious, well-stewarded side of it. And so
So,
Sorry, what is the trick to think it's achieving by appending this project?
well, the magician sector in general, it is so critical of anybody's building project. If that architect, you think of Amenhotep in Egypt, who served the pharaoh, who helped him build a lot of incredible things. You know, when things are operating right, that magician actually helps in the architectural project. It helps understand what could be built. But the magician will always, it'll say, well, Your Majesty, we could build this city. We could build this pyramid. We could build this city. We could build this park. And it will go on and on. Creating what Kierkegaard called the sickness of infinitude. That is, the magician is going to constantly be coming to you with projects. And you say, here, Your Majesty. And then you say, oh, this looks interesting. And then the architect says, yes, but you notice here that this is really not perfect. So let's look at this other one. And so it's extremely, see, the only thing in you that's going to choose is that part of you sitting on that throne. And finally, that part has got to say, we will build this for good or ill. We will build this. And Mr. Magician, I need your help in this building. So shut the up if you're not being helpful. And so we come to the full flowering of the golden flower of the male soul and of possibilities for a human community. And this morning I have only a few minutes to just offer a few points on what we just observed. And before we leave, we'll be thinking about how we will steward our gifts, our potentials, going forward into the future. I think a good way to frame this territory here is the opening to the fifth element. The opening to the fifth element. As I noted to you earlier, we're in this wonderful hall, 5-5. And I said that I suspect that the founders of this, the designers, had a sense of the holding together the five elements. In that Mayan pyramidal shape that we've been talking about, there are four sides, but there also is that point where the four come together. People used to ask me, well, isn't the king on the top and the others lower? No, the king archetype in itself is a part of the synergistic cooperative field. So the matured human soul is the result of that holding together and those bringing together those potentials until a fifth element emerges. And I got to do this.
You know, by the time I have been kind and loving and compassionate and understanding all week in my work, by Friday night, I need a masculine movie of some kind, you know. And one of them that I've enjoyed is humorous, but with a very deep underwriting theme, is the movie The Fifth Element with Bruce Willis. I mean, you get a jolt of testosterone anytime Willis is around. But in that movie, they're picking up. It'd be interesting to know how much the person that wrote that script had a sense of any of these spiritual dimensions. But in the story, the world is at great risk. And someone has to come along. It's very much like the Parsifal story. Someone has to come along and to be able to do what is necessary to invoke the emergence of the fifth element for the world to have a chance. So I'd like to say, you know, if you look in part 5 of this 2007 King Within, in the very last part, there's a discussion of, yes, the attainment of the balancing of those 4 systems, those 4 potentials in a man or woman's soul. But if a person only achieves that, they may become truly very, very radiant. But if the fifth element is not discovered, is not opened to, the opening to the emergence of the fifth element, then what may have developed is an extremely high-performance narcissist who can have quite a lot of worldly success and acclaim. That personality, however, can never actually have much inner peace or satisfaction, even with their enormous achievements. And the reason is that they are still ego-bound. It is still all about him or all about her. There are built into the human soul self-sabotaging controls that if a person becomes extremely creative, begins to shine extremely brightly, except for extreme cases of some psychopaths, there will be a self-sabotaging mechanism come in to take them down. That is the nemesis, which is always attracted by hubris. So in this opening, we just saw it enacted. We saw it dramatized. In opening to what I like to call the great other. Now, you know, just as there are ego psychologists, there are ego theologians of every tribe, and who simply try to take the great experience of the great other and turn it into a franchise, a Buddhist franchise, a Hindu franchise, a Christian franchise, a Wicca franchise. But it is ego spirituality, ego theology, ego religion. Because the great other cannot be controlled by language, anybody's language. And it cannot be manipulated and controlled finally by any ego. And so when I speak of the great other, don't let the bad job the theologians are equivalent of your tradition
have done, the bad job they've done in mediating the actual experience of the sacred, don't let them keep you from understanding that if you wish to experience the optimal possible human, whether you're a man or a woman, you have to somehow find your way to open to the fifth element. Because then and only then will it stop being all about you. And when you can open to the great other, however you choose to language it, at that moment, the ego is really not, the personal self is not actually, this is very important, the personal self is not really destroyed. Actually, contrary to a lot of sort of human-hating interpretations, the personal human self is enhanced and begins to be what it was probably imagined to be by the Creator. And a flow of communion begins to flow from the great other between the great other and your personal self. The mystery here is that if you're a very creative person, I mean, if you're blessed and cursed with becoming a very creative person, the more creative you get, the more in danger you will be of self-sabotage and self-immolation, unintentional self-immolation. So if this,
just explain what immolation is.
That means burning yourself up. In other words, you will unwittingly burn yourself up on your own creativity, and you may have to become an addict to contain your creativity, to try to contain it, to cool it down. But in any case, the important thing here is to realize that you cannot find any real peace. You cannot find any real deep satisfaction without it being spoiled by the nemesis, unless this opening to the great other, unless you can find your way to that somehow through the resources available to you. No one else needs to know about this. Only those who can be trusted not to depreciate it. But this is something between you, your personal self, and the great other. And so that is the point. We like to talk about the possible generative human in both men and women. High-level narcissism is not generativity. It will never issue in generativity. And one can never really have the character it takes to be a good steward of your gifts as long as your ego is at the center of your world. The actual only way to achieve the optimum possible human in your life, including your optimal creativity, is to open to the fifth element so that you can experience what Parsifal experienced and then begin to stand in your creative power in such a way that it can be offered to the world for the healing of the world, for the building of a world that is seeking justice and peace.
And so, stewardship, making your offering, that's the last thing I want to mention here. Every man in this room, every woman has a gift that only they can bring to the world. Only they can bring to the world. At the heart of the myth of the king is the deepest meaning of conscious sacrifice. You have to be able to make an offering. And so one of the things that we want you to be thinking about today is that if you could connect with your powers and bring them into such balance that they become an inner chalice, they become a vessel, an inner temple, in which the God energies, the creative energies of the human soul can find a dwelling place in you. Then your gift, if you can offer it up to the great other with authenticity, as the most worthy gift that you have, then that is the completion of your human task. Because this is very important to remember, lest you get into despair. You are not responsible for the outcomes. I know it's kind of heroic to want to kind of think you can be in charge of outcomes, but if you start taking on responsibility for the actual outcomes, you will become so overwhelmed and shut down by the size of the task that you will go into despair. You are not responsible for final outcomes in this history of ours. What are you responsible for? You are responsible for making an offering that is the most worthy offering that you have. And if you bring that into your communion with the great other and offer that to the possible new earth, then you will find satisfaction. And when you are old, you will not be in that pain of amphortos. You will have a deep sense of having made your offering. And you will be able to say not only it is finished, but it's enough. So that's what we want to lift up for you this morning. What we saw in the story is a possibility for you and for all human beings, no matter what their tribe, no matter what their race, no matter what their spiritual tradition. This is a possibility. And so as you go and reflect together on what you've gotten out of the week, I hope that you will realize that there's really wonderful stuff in there in you. There's a gift only you can bring to the world. And reflecting on that is our final worthy task.